Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Dean Janvier, a partner at Deloitte Canada. Dean is a Dene citizen from the Cold Lake First Nations in northeastern Alberta. He has more than 20 years of experience in the areas of First Nations and Canadian politics, Indigenous policy, corporate relations, and communications. Dean, thanks so much for being with us this week.
Nice to see you, Dennis. Thanks for having me.
Well, I know you've been involved in the child welfare class action, so just wondering if maybe we'll start with your thoughts on the recent Supreme Court of Canada ruling that affirms First Nation, Inuit, and Métis self-government and jurisdiction over their child welfare services.
Well, I think like many people who've been watching that case unfold, I was very, very happy to see that the Supreme Court of Canada upheld our inherent right and our ability to pass laws and exercise our jurisdiction over our families and our children. And I'd like to especially applaud the Assembly of First Nations of Quebec and Labrador, as they made a really strong stand against that and stood up to it and helped lead the way so that we could all benefit from that victory at the Supreme Court.
Do you think that victory has broader implications than just child welfare?
Well, I'm hoping. I think it's an important decision, and I think it underscores the assertion that we have rights that predate Canada, and that prior to contact, we were always self-governing and had our own laws and our own jurisdictions, and it stands to reason that we could continue to exercise those rights today. So I'm hoping that there will be more decisions like that to come if needed in the future, but I'd like to see us just continue to exercise our rights as we go.
Dean, can you tell us a bit about your role and the role that Deloitte has in the $23 billion child welfare settlement?
Sure. Deloitte has been appointed as the administrator of the class action settlement agreement regarding child and family services and Jordan's principle in the child class. And it's a big responsibility, which means we're not a party to the agreement. We didn't negotiate the agreement, but we'll be the organization that's responsible to implement it and be accountable for exercising, all of the terms and conditions that go along with the agreement, to make sure that the claimants receive their compensation in a timely fashion and that First Nations are kept informed along the way throughout the class action as it unfolds.
I guess the timely fashion part might be the most interest to viewers. Any updates on timelines?
Yeah, what I can tell you is that the work is currently underway. The parties continue to meet on a regular basis and are working hard towards finalizing the claims process and so on. And there should be some announcements in the coming weeks regarding the next steps and the timelines associated with that.
Nice. I'm sure a lot of people will be looking forward to that.
For sure. Yeah.
Dean, you're also a former band counselor, do a lot of work with youth. What do you think this settlement, the largest in Canadian history, means for those who've been harmed by the child welfare system?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to say that, I'm very thankful that all the people who had to experience that in their lifetime received some measure of recognition of what they've been through, including their caregivers from whom they were taken, and the harm that it may have caused them as individuals and to their families and to their lives. Of course, no amount of money will make up for that, but it certainly goes a long way to providing some recognition for those harms that they suffered, first of all. And I think in addition, the fact that there was a lot of discussion about the need for long-term reform, the need to rebuild the system itself, and and redesign it so that it's supporting families all the way through as they work through their various stages of recovery and, decolonization and transformation. I think that's an important piece, so that, we're not looking at it as, a system where we take individuals out of families and put them into another system, but we look at strengthening families, strengthening communities, and building from our strengths, our language, our culture, our spirituality, our way of life on the land, and our connection to family and kin. I think that's all really, really important as we go forward.
Yeah, lots of work to do on the road ahead.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
As I mentioned, Dean, Deloitte has been working with Indigenous youth for a number of years now, including a report released this month called Breaking Colonial Legacies and Mapping New Pathways to Mental Wellness. Before we get into that report, I guess, why do you think it's important for a company like Deloitte to be gauging the thoughts of Indigenous youth?
Well, I think that, it's very positive that a company like Deloitte, the one that I work for, is taking the time to engage with Indigenous youth and listen to what they have to say. I think that being one of the companies that was able to put together a reconciliation action plan very shortly after the release of the Truth and Reconciliation final report, taking very seriously call to action number 92, which calls on the corporate sector to do its part towards reconciliation, acts of reconciliation. How can we achieve reconciliation without including youth in the design of reconciliation, hearing what their needs are, what their concerns are? So I'm really glad that Deloitte makes the effort to take the time from time to time to listen to the youth and see what they have to say on various topics, not just the ones we normally ask them about, right?
Dean, going back to some of those things that the company's done with youth, and I think there's been at least like 3 different reports or so far, but what do you see as some of the systemic barriers Indigenous youth are facing on a path to academic and career success?
Well, I think that's such a good question. And, in the words of the youth themselves, right, they're facing multiple challenges. First of all, the quality of education that a lot of them are receiving, in high schools and junior high schools isn't hitting the mark for them. They're finding out when they start trying to achieve in post-secondary. So there could have been multiple problems, right? Maybe there were challenges at home. Maybe there were challenges regarding peer pressure and social media that, made them, unable to integrate very well into the local school system, or maybe they were, faced racism, and other kinds of challenges that made it an unpleasant experience for them. Maybe their level of academic achievement wasn't quite what they had hoped it would be. So those are some of the streamer problems. And I think, going through post-secondary, we're familiar with these challenges. There's a lack of financial support. There's a lack of affordable housing. Sometimes they feel alienated and lack of cultural or other connections to other Indigenous people or their home communities, and they feel loneliness and struggle in that regard. It could be other problems related to life challenges that they would face, like mental health or wellness or addictions. It could be many of these things that could come in their way there. And then even if they make it as far as graduation and are trying to get into the labor force, they're finding difficulties regarding being seen as an Aboriginal or Indigenous person in the workplace instead of just a worker who happens to be Indigenous. Mm-hmm. There's problems with racism, systemic and microaggressions, and different things that they're experiencing every day. It makes it difficult for them to succeed. And so what they're asking for is supports all the way through, and in particular supports as they're trying to graduate from post-secondary and integrate into the workforce through co-ops, through summer jobs, through mentoring, and then some pairing and some support through the first 5 years of their professional career. and I think those are all really good recommendations, and I really support the call that they've made to do those things.
Right. Dean, much more to talk about here. We just need to step out for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Deloitte Canada's Dene Janvier. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Dene Janvier, a partner in audit and assurance with Deloitte Canada. And before the break, Dean, we were talking about some of the work Deloitte's done with youth. And I just to kind of wrap that part of this conversation up, in this era of so-called reconciliation, do you feel that the youth are being left behind?
Well, I think the youth have always been in a situation of vulnerability and continue to be for a lot of reasons. So I don't want to say they're being left behind, but we certainly have a long way to go to catch them up to where they should be, at the same level as their peers.
Deloitte recently also released a new practice called nation building. Can you tell us about that?
Right on. Nation building for us is a brand new way of engaging with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit groups and communities. And the idea behind it is to be working with them to help them achieve their goals towards sovereignty and self-determination and economic independence. And, we've organized that into three main approaches that we're willing to work with the nations on. And one of them relates to, asserting jurisdiction, improving governance, having a very strong administration and financial area. So that's, sort of one area, one column, if you will. The next one is regarding their dealings with land, natural resources, economic development, environment, all of those pieces related to the land. And then the third piece is meeting the basic needs of every community. So that could be everything from water to infrastructure to housing to all the things that nations need every day. So those are kind of the three main ways that we like to look at supporting nations on their path towards self-determination.
Are there goals, Dean, that you'd like to see achieved with this new nation building practice?
100%. I think it's important to work with Indigenous governments, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governments, and to support their people. And I'm always brought back to one of the things that my late friend Elijah Harper told me once, because this was after the apology and from the Prime Minister Harper regarding Indian residential schools. He asked me what I thought of that, and I thought, I thought that was an important day. And he said to me, he goes, Dean, he said it was. He goes, but now you have the responsibility to change the institutions, the laws, the policies, and the regulations that led to the creation of residential schools, and for our people to create those things for themselves. And I think that's one of the key things that's always stuck in my mind is, if we're not going to be operating underneath the federal government or underneath their laws, such as the Indian Act and other oppressive legislation, in what way are we going to create our own institutions going forward, our own constitutions, our own laws, our own regulations? And, because if you don't use it, your jurisdiction, you will lose it, right, at the end of the day. And that's the part that I'm very passionate about.
Good points there. Dene, as we mentioned, you're previously a band councillor for
Yes.
Cold Lake First Nations, which has quite the portfolio of companies. You're also the president and CEO of Siksika Group of Companies, which today is also involved in real estate, hotels, construction, of course, the energy sector. Are these the types of examples of leaders in First Nations economic development?
I applaud both Cold Lake and Siksika and all the other nations across the country that are making great strides towards economic independence. And, it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of growing pains along the way. And it's not that everything's all perfect there today either, right? There's still a long ways to go. But I do believe that, creating opportunities for economic growth, where nations have resources that they own and control themselves without having to answer to government bodies, without having to rely exclusively on transfer payments. This strengthens nations and it gives them confidence. And when individuals in those nations can start businesses or earn a paycheck that's independent of the Band Council, there again, you're creating another layer of a middle class that's independent and can have their own thoughts and ambitions as well. And what I've noticed that's even more important is when these nations reach out to their neighbors and they start working collaboratively, that creates a positive interaction and relationship with non-Indigenous neighboring communities. And over time, like it doesn't happen overnight, but you can then start to see a more of a social cohesion, more of a positive social experience for all people in that area. And eventually, hopefully we'll start to see more and more of that across the country, which is one of the most important conditions for achieving reconciliation, is when no one is left behind economically and everybody benefits from what's going on in the area. I think those are all really good things that I've seen happening, not just in Cold Lake or Siksika, but in other places across the country as well. We have many, many leaders out there that have been doing a lot of great things for many years that we're building upon.
Yeah, Dene, are there other projects out there right now in development or that have happened that are particularly exciting?
Well, I think, as we continue to work on these things, I'm really hopeful that we can see more women, Indigenous women, coming into the workplace, coming into the workforce, and that the recommendations from the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, that those continue to be acted upon. And I'm also really, really excited to see what this coming generation and the next generation of our youth will accomplish, but also the fact that they want to stay connected to our elders and to our culture and our way of life and improve their mental health and well-being. Those are all very exciting developments, and I hope we can continue to build on the positive and continue to reach out to those who are most in need and find ways to support them and help them to find a better way of life, and they can feel included in what we talk about as reconciliation, that it's not just for those who have something today, but something we're working to include all of our people, all of our family, all of our relatives.
Dene, given your background in those companies and so forth, has economic development, business always something that you've been interested in?
I'm glad you asked that because, I think when I was younger, I really wanted to make movies. I wanted to be a filmmaker. That was my first sort of love, and that didn't really pan out for me. And then by fluke, I ended up working at the Assembly of First Nations, and I got really interested in supporting our people, in terms of politics, policies, and helping move those yardsticks. But, around 2009, that's when I decided that I was going to focus going forward on helping our nations to achieve economic sovereignty. And that's what I set my goals on, both personally and professionally, since that time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you ever wanted to get into the art world.
Yeah, well, people ask me that because of my dad being Alex Janvier. And the only thing I ever got to do with him was work on a mural in Ottawa. And but it was, a time that I'll always treasure. And, that piece of art is still there today. So something my children can go look at from time to time.
Dene, you mentioned the film world. You did a couple episodes of Blackstone, right?
Oh, I just consulted on that with some people. I never performed before the camera, but yeah, like I said, I dabbled here and there in that world, and I tried to make something of it. But yeah. I guess my true calling was to serve the community.
For sure. More to talk about here, Dene. We just have to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here with Dene Janvier on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Dean Janvier with Deloitte Canada. And Dean, we're short on time. I wanted to ask you about a recent announcement by Pierre Poilievre, the optional First Nations resource charge, and what that could mean for communities. They say it'd be putting a lot of money back into the pockets of First Nations rather than Ottawa. But, there was some reaction to it that, there's this mistrust that's left over from the Harper era. Well, I guess, what are you hearing from those you work with about a potential change in government, and is there concern out there of a return to Harper era policies?
Thanks for the question. Well, one thing that's for sure is that there'll always be a change in government at some point, right? The other thing that's for sure is that we as Indigenous peoples in Canada, we don't have, the numbers to really decide on our own which government we would ever prefer. So it's on us to decide how and in what way we're going to engage with any government. And as you've seen over many years, we can choose a wide range of tactics and strategies to deal with any particular government, from direct confrontation to engaging with them in a constructive way, anywhere along that continuum. So, that's something to keep in mind. I think it's also fair to say that we have way more power than we've ever had in this country in many respects, both elected and unelected. And, we're getting more and more integrated into the business fabric of Canadian society. So we're definitely not a group that can be ignored any longer. And I'm truly hopeful that we've gone so far down the road of reconciliation that we can't go back to the way things were before. And I hope that Canadians will demand that of any government they put in power. Having said that, I don't think it's time to be alarmed at any policies that are being proposed by any party. I think there's pros and cons to each and every party, and pros and cons to each and every policy. The idea that there would be a mechanism to flow through, royalties and other, benefits earned by the Crown back to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, that's an idea worth considering. But it's hard to say yes or no to anything when you don't know any details about it. And the other thing is that, there's still going to be a need to have a positive engagement with our people as we go forward. I mean, look at the fact that, one of our own, Wab-Kinuw, was elected premium.
Right.
So, we will have a voice at the table one way or the other, and it would be better if that all parties had a positive relationship with our people and can continue the dialogue and develop good policies going forward.
Well, Dean, we'll have to leave it there, but it was great to sit down and have a conversation with you this week. Thanks for doing the show.
Happy to do so. Thank you, Dennis, and take care.
That is all the time we have for this week. You can catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website, aptnnews.ca. This show and past episodes are also available as podcasts. You can find those wherever you download your podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward. We'll see you back here in 7 days.